Welcome to another episode of the Future Founder Promise podcast, where we here at Stellate learn in the open and we share what we're learning on our journey of building this startup. I'm Max, I'm the CEO here at Stellate, and today I'm talking with Lauren Bell, our full cycle recruiter. Lauren, welcome to the show, and I would actually love to hear, where do you think your journey started and what did you learn along the way?
That's a great question, Max. I think, like many people, I went into college and I had a certain goal in mind, and I really thought I knew what my career path was going to look like. And frankly, I think if I had gone that path, it would have been successful in a lot of ways. But I am so thankful that I have always embraced a growth mindset and been open to stretching myself. And when new opportunities knock on my door, I typically am open to considering them, and I want to jump in feet first and really learn from what that looks like. So for me, senior year of college, I was approached and had the opportunity to join a startup. It was, frankly, at that point, it was truly just an idea. It was um, right at the infant stage of growth. And so I was able to join that company. It was in a completely different space. It was entertainment and events, but through that was able to really learn what it took to build a company from scratch and grow and bring on really talented, smart people that you could get them going and let them run and trust them to do the job. And so that was an incredibly life-changing experience. I was able to be with that company for a little over 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So much growth, so much opportunity within that, and really showed me that I think my passion was working with people and also helping build things that hadn't existed before.
So, what did you study something related to events in college, and then they approached you and were like, "We need somebody to run events," or how did you even get into that space in the first place?
I feel like most people, I fell into it. I did not study events in college. I actually studied strategic communications, which was advertising and public relations. But I've
Mm.
always had a passion for people. And so I was super involved on my campus. I was a tour guide. I was in all these organizations and I loved my experience. And so I actually wanted to be an admissions counselor and work for the college in admissions and help other students have the opportunity to have the same experience that I had had, which is funny because now thinking about that, this is the first time I've actually correlated that it correlates to recruiting and what I do now in my current role. And so
Oh,
that was what
wow.
my career path was going to be, was admissions and working at the college level on recruiting. And then through connections, which has been the story of my career, is how important relationships are and connections are. Through connections, I was approached with an opportunity. I'll never forget, I got a phone call, somebody I trusted, and they said, "Hey, I have a founder. This founder may be a little bit crazy, but I think he's onto something, and he has a vision and he is very passionate about what he's going after. And I think it's worth your time meeting with him and seeing if there's something there." And that's what happened is I met with him. Super simple company at the time. It was very modest little office. And I think my parents frankly thought I was crazy to give up the opportunity I had in front of me when I said, "No, I'm actually going to join an event and entertainment company startup that only has 3 other employees. I'm going to be employee number 4, and I'm going to see what that vision looks like and that growth and that journey looks like for me." And so looking back, I'm so thankful that I did take that risk because it really has impacted the rest of my life and what that looked like. I started as most people do, especially in a startup, but especially as a new employee fresh out of college. I was doing anything and everything they needed me to do. But that was what really helped hone and develop my skill set to not be afraid to take on things that I haven't done before and stretch myself.
So, over those 8 years, as you went from sort of being the fourth employee to seeing this company grow and I hope flourish, what did you learn? What did you take away from those 8 years that's still influencing your career today?
Oh my gosh, so many learnings. One of my previous managers, he used to say the phrase that your 20s are your learning years, your 30s are your earning years. And I really embraced that. And throughout my 20s, I felt like any opportunity I had to take on a new challenge, let's go for it and let's do it. I learned a lot by trial and error as it related to growing teams and hiring people, taking chances on people who sometimes didn't exactly fit what you were thought you were looking for, but they had special skill sets or special traits that we felt like we could see the opportunity in growing them. At this company, We hired a lot for what we thought their future growth might look like. We were open to hiring people that were more junior in their career, but had done things that showed us that they would have that aptitude to really excel down the road. That taught me a lot about hiring and recruiting and being open-minded to people of different backgrounds and different skill sets, and not always, if they have the exact pedigree you're looking for on paper, that's maybe not always the most important thing. There's so many factors to consider when you're trying to find top talent. Some of the other things I learned: people management, building departments from nothing, building processes, and the importance of building those processes early so that when the company scales, you're not having to retroactively go back and document things, or retroactively go back and create those processes. Those are some of the biggest takeaways. Honestly, as well, just having a deep appreciation and care for your people, because your people are what make the company. And if you don't take care of your people, then what you're doing doesn't really matter in the long run, because you're not going to retain that top talent. And so for me, I think that was a huge lesson learned, and something that I've now taken into future roles, is the importance of really trusting and caring for your people and making sure that they are in a space where they are doing their best work. And the way to do that is through, acceptance and creating that psychological trust with those people.
So you hired people who maybe were more junior in their career, but were showing great, in the engineering world, there's this saying, hire for slope, not intercept, right? Like hire for how fast they're growing rather than where they're at today. And it sounds like you were doing that, and then also trusting them to learn the things, right? And to grow themselves. Were there any experiences where that worked really well or where that didn't work at all? And what did you learn, sort of, how are you applying that, I guess, in your recruiting now, where you got to look at people and you're like, how do you judge for aptitude, I guess, is really the question I'm asking. How do you find the people with that really steep slope who maybe are more junior but who are growing really quickly?
I think you look for people that are entrepreneurial in their mindset, especially in the startup world. You want people who are pioneers, who are going to not be afraid of going into uncharted territory and doing things that someone hasn't done before. You look for people that maybe have either not been in the traditional corporate America environment, or maybe some people that have, but they've quickly found out that that's not the environment for them, and they really embrace that pioneer spirit. It's hard to quantify that in words on exactly what that looks like, but I think those are the biggest things that you can kind of tell from conversations with people. And uncovering, I think one of the other really important factors is looking for passion. I think when you find people that are equally passionate towards a common goal, and they're going to be hardworking and relentless towards achieving that goal, I think that's a huge indicator of future success.
That's fascinating. And so, would you say across the board that approach has worked well? Were there experiences where it worked really well, or maybe also experiences where that didn't work at all?
It's absolutely worked really well, and then I would be lying if I said there were not instances where it did not work. um, Without going into too many details, there have absolutely been times where we put somebody in a role that it wasn't the right fit. And a lot of times it's understanding, not only is it not the right fit for the company, but it's also not the right fit for the employee. And sometimes it takes a really intuitive manager to understand that, and you kind of have to really handle that situation delicately. But the good news is, one example comes to mind of an individual that was working for me. She was in a role that really wasn't catering to her skill set, and it wasn't bringing out the best in her every day. And so we did everything we could to coach, to put her on a performance improvement plan, and to really try to get her to a place where she would be happy in this role. But ultimately, after a couple months, we determined it wasn't working and it wasn't the right fit. We had the tough conversation and we ended up letting this individual go, but we were around her to support her in what her ultimate goals are. And now every time I get on social media, I see her living her best life. She's now a tour manager for a band, and she travels the world with this band, and she goes to festivals, and she is just, you can see it in her face how passionate she is. And it wasn't a right fit for her to be an office manager at our company. That wasn't the right fit for this individual. And so I was thankful that she was willing to go on that journey with me and try. But ultimately, it taught me as a manager, sometimes you're going to have people that it's like a puzzle. They just don't fit in that space. And you have to figure out how best can we help them achieve those goals elsewhere. And sometimes, unfortunately, that may not be with your company, but human to human, doing everything you can to support them. I think that's ultimately what's most important.
Something that I've been surprised about founding Stellate is how specific our puzzle holes are, if that makes sense. Specifically in the people that we've been looking for and the roles we've been looking to fill, I've been surprised in how actually difficult it is to find those people, which sounds ridiculous because we've built a great team and we're very fortunate to now have however many, more than a dozen people, almost 20 I think, of really great people who really fit, I think, in the puzzle pieces. But it's surprising to me how rare those people are, and it's actually kind of shifted my mindset coming from an IC world where I was interviewing for jobs. I always kind of thought, I was being tested, but really it's equally about testing the other way and figuring out, it's not just for them to figure out, am I the right puzzle piece for their hole, but also for me to figure out, is that the hole that I want to fill? Like, is that the right place where I want to be, that plays to my strengths and that plays to my passion and that plays to what I want to do, right? And it sounds like this person that you're talking about, she took this job, but then it just wasn't the right fit for her, right? And really her passion lied somewhere else. And when she realized that, she eventually managed to find apparently a space that suited her better. And now she can bring all of her passion and her energy to managing the tours of this band and travel the world.
Yeah.
And that really suits her well.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It really is. I feel like interviewing is such a two-way street. And more often than not, I'm starting to see candidates really embrace that. And they're asking the hard-hitting questions. They want to dive in and understand, what is this going to look like? Because so much of your day-to-day life is spent in a work environment. You want to be happy and you want to be passionate and you really want to enjoy what you're doing. And so I think it's so important that candidates approach it from that perspective. And if anything, I really appreciate when candidates start hitting me with those questions, because it shows me that they're really being intentional in their process. I know at Stellate, one of our core values is intentionality. And when candidates can show that in the process and they really take it seriously and do their research and do their homework, because this is one of the biggest life decisions you may ever make outside of choosing your partner in life, is choosing where you're going to work and spend and invest that time. And so I think that's a huge, important process as it relates to recruiting.
I was actually just before this podcast interview interviewing a candidate for a design role, and they literally asked the question, I'm not a technical person, like I can't code. Why are you talking to me? Why do you think that I can be successful at Stellate as a designer, right? Like, what makes you think that I can come into a company with a really technical product and be successful? And I thought that was a great question to ask, right? Like they literally, that's a scary question to ask because you're putting yourself out there, but it's a great question to ask because it'll be on their mind, right? And so we got to talking about how, design is all about understanding the user and then fulfilling their needs somehow, right? And figuring out what that looks like. And really, it's very it translates across industry, that skill of understanding users and then building something to solve their problems. The solution might look different, and yes, you'll have to work to learn exactly what the parameters of software engineers are that are using our products, sure, but you can learn that, right? And if you can work with people and you can understand their needs and then build something for them in the shape that they need, you'll iterate and learn quickly anyway, which was kind of my answer. But I just love that person asked that question and just brought to the table, hey, I feel like I'm maybe not the right fit for this whole. What makes you think that I am, right? Like, why are we talking here? What am I not thinking about? What am I missing that it makes you think that I'm really the puzzle piece that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, that it, like you said, it takes a little bit of bravery to ask those type of questions and call out that you may not have all the knowledge. You may not fully understand the product. We are a highly technical company catering to a highly technical audience. But I think that, again, shows really good self-awareness. And that would have been, as a recruiter, I would have actually been impressed to hear somebody ask that question.
Same. I was definitely very impressed by that question. So you were at this events company for 8 years. How did you go from doing, it sounded like you were doing a little bit of everything. What made you decide to go deeper into recruiting specifically? Like, what appealed to you about that from this experience of 8 years of doing, sounded like pretty much everything?
Yes, it truly was everything. There were times where I felt like, and I was a travel agent, booking flights. There were times where I was coordinating, either small intimate events, but also anywhere up to $1 million plus conferences, private parties, concerts, you name it. And while that was really thrilling and exciting to be a part of the action and be behind the scenes, I always just naturally found myself gravitating towards people and gravitating towards helping them find what their passions were and bringing out the best in them and being there as a support system for them. And so naturally, that kind of took me down a pathway over time of human resources and people operations to begin with. It's fine at the beginning when you're a startup of just a handful of people to not really have a formal people operations department, but eventually it comes a time where you're like, well, we need to document what our processes look like. We need to have somebody that is overseeing employee reviews or training or growth, or what does career ladders look like? What do all those things look like? And so once we got to that point, that was when I just kind of raised my hand and said, I don't know what I'm doing exactly there, but I feel like I have a passion for people. And so I think that will drive me to be successful in that role. And that's where I started to take on a lot more of all of the human resources and people operations. From there, I think I just started taking on more and more responsibility and gaining trust, both from our founder and our executive team, but also from the people that we were bringing into the organization. And so I helped kickstart an internship program. That was one of the things I was really proud of, is bringing in interns to the company and helping them get a taste for what this career path could look like for them and giving them some experience. Over time, brought on more from a training perspective and did some internal training programs that I helped run and operate. That was really rewarding. It was challenging. Again, to write something from nothing and develop a training program from nothing is really intimidating, but at the same time, really rewarding when you see people getting value out of that. And then eventually, it just made sense. I was all things people for the company, and I was really passionate about the company. And I think that came through when I was talking to candidates. I could see that passion that I had for what we were doing. And so what started as me being the person that would give the office tours, and I was just the designated person that would give tours and talk about what we did, that evolved into me being our main recruiter and leading all of our interviews, and then going out and sourcing talent and trying to bring top talent into the organization. And so it was not necessarily intentional, but it happened over the years, and I'm so thankful that it did, because I gained so many amazing experiences from doing that and helping build that company.
It sounds to me like there's a theme here where you're unafraid to jump into new challenges, even if you don't know what you're doing, like you did with HR and or people ops generally, right? You were like, I don't know what I'm doing, but if you want me to figure it out, I can go figure it out, right? And you just jumped right in and you put yourself out there and really dove into it with knowing that you have a knack for people, right? And knowing that you enjoy working with people. You were like, I might be able to figure this out. Let me just go and try, right? And I can't promise that I'll do great because I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to go and figure it out. And obviously you figured it out and you're doing great. So I think there's a pattern here of you trying new things and doing them really well. And I think the other thing that stuck out to me, actually, I think the first time we talked, maybe, Lauren, I think the first time we talked, I felt your great energy, right? Like you bring this great energy into the room where everybody that you talk to, I think, just leaves the room happier than they were before. And I think that's a beautiful gift that you have, where you just really connect with people and bring them a lot of joy with your energy and with your presence. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm not surprised that you ended up working with people. I'm glad that you found that passion for yourself.
Oh, I appreciate it. That's really nice that you say that. And I think I've heard that from a few different people throughout my life, is that I have that as like a skill. And that's where I think if you can be self-aware and you start to hear these patterns and you start to recognize them, you should lean into that in your career. And that's what I did. And now I look up and I'm like, wow, it's brought me through all of these different amazing companies, and through every company I've worked for, I've been able to learn and grow. And all the people that I interact with, whether it be just one interview touch point or I spend years working with somebody, you can learn so much from those interactions and those connections with people. And it's ultimately so important. And so again, I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm really thankful my career has brought me to this point so far.
So you spent 8 years, which in startup world is an eternity, at this events company. Why did you eventually decide to leave, and how did you decide what to do next? Where did you go from here?
So I would be lying if I said that COVID did not just completely decimate the event and entertainment industry. It was hard to see a huge year that we had planned ahead of us. It was probably going to be one of our most profitable years. And then COVID hits and the world just completely changed in an instant. I'll never forget, we were all sitting in the office and we made the call as an executive team that news is spreading that this disease, not a disease, this virus is spreading and we need to send our people home. And I think at the time we thought, okay, we're sending everybody home for a week. We told people, bring what you want. We'll see you all back here in a few days. We'll be back in our normal environment. And we never went back to an office environment. And man, did that year, 2 years of the pandemic show me the importance of being nimble and agile. And it completely changed our work culture and what that looked like. And I would be lying if I said that was a really hard time, especially for people in people ops, because your team was struggling. Mental health was down probably at its lowest point ever, and employees were uncertain of what their future looked like. We had to make some really tough decisions as an organization. We ended up downsizing quite a bit, and our headcount shrunk. And ultimately, I think for me, I felt like I had achieved so much in those 8 years, and I was so proud of the work I had done, but I almost felt like I had finally reached a ceiling and I had done everything that I could do within this organization. And I felt like I had given them my heart and soul and I had poured out everything I possibly could, but it was no longer exciting and challenging in that sense. I needed to go on to my next challenge and learn and be able to build. And so that was when opportunity knocked and I had the opportunity to join a new startup. And again, it was a completely different industry. It was my first opportunity to work in the tech space with really smart developers. And I was intimidated, but I was open to learning and growing in that challenge. And I see the opportunity within the tech space. So that's what brought me here.
Going back to the original point, you're unafraid to jump into new things and learn new things, right? What was that transition like, going from the events company to moving into more of a sort of tech Silicon Valley startup? Were there cultural differences that you had to reconcile? Was there like an onboarding period where you were like, wow, this is really different?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my mind was just blown initially at how much more efficient and effective, frankly, that we could have been. And now in hindsight, I'm like, man, I wish I had that knowledge to take back to that event company because there's so many tools and processes that we could have been implementing that would have made us a lot more efficient and effective. And of course, that's what tech is doing. So it makes sense that I would have learned those from really smart people within the tech industry. But yes, there was absolutely a ramp up period. And I was very thankful again that they saw the opportunity and the potential in me, and they were willing to let me have those first couple months where I was ramping up and I was learning in so many different aspects. And so tooling and the importance of sprint planning and the importance of asynchronous communication and really staying in touch and making sure that everybody that you're working with, no matter across time zones, is in the loop. I think all of these things were huge learnings for me. I had never worked in that type of environment before. So it was a huge change, but I'm so thankful for that because now I feel like I can work with people all over the world and be successful.
Are there any specific tools or processes, or I know you just touched on a few, but are there any specific things that stick out to you where like, man, I wish we had that at the events company. We would have been so much more efficient or effective. Is there anything that sticks out to you where like, wow, this is so much better than what we were doing?
Oh my gosh, just the simple things, which are going to make people laugh, but just the tools on being able to have AI join your meetings and take notes for you and take meeting minutes or record calls. I mean, I can't tell you how many important meetings where I was frantically typing every word that somebody was saying to try to capture it while I was also trying to be a part of the meeting and be an active participant. And it's really hard when you have to context switch and take notes, but then also try to be an active participant. And so those are like mindless things for me now where I'm like, of course we would have Grain or we would have Otter join our call. And of course we would take notes in that way. But that was just not part of our culture. And that was a huge eye-opening experience where I'm like, of course we should have been doing this for so long. But now I've learned it. I think also just having documentation open and out there in the public. One of the things I really appreciate about Stellate, and I also learned at my previous tech company experience, was the importance of defaulting to open and having information live out in the open so that everybody has the opportunity to have that context and get up to speed. And so things like Notion, again, I had no clue that that type of platform even existed, but it's so nice to know that there is a way for us to all easily contribute and collaborate and put our documentation in a place where we can then all search it and have it accessible at our fingertips and not have to send an email and wait for a department head to send you the information that you need back. And it's all siloed. That was what I was used to working in. The information was very siloed. And now having it all together is just, it's great. And it makes your workday flow in a lot more efficient and effective way.
I think those are two great callouts that seem totally normal to me coming from very much tech background. It's fascinating to hear that they aren't, which of course is obvious, right? I don't know how many of my high school friends who, most of them are not in tech startups, I don't know how many of them know even what Slack is, never mind what Notion is, or definitely not what Grain or Other are. I'm pretty sure many of their organizations still, I have friends that work in hospitals and at big consultancies, and I'm pretty sure a lot of their companies work a lot differently than we do.
Oh yeah. Even Slack, you saying that makes me think I will never forget how resistant our leadership was to Slack. We said, hey, there's this new tool out there and it's going to change the way we communicate. And they hated Slack. They were opposed to it. Why would we change from email? What's wrong with email? Everybody emails. Why would we change from text message? We had text message changed, and it was always so hard to go and find what text message chain you were thinking of, and what if somebody's on an Android versus an iPhone. I mean, again, now looking back, I'm like, I cannot believe we were functioning that way. But at the time, that was all we knew, and that we were doing the best we could with limited resources. We didn't have that technology lens that we were applying. But now, using Slack on a daily basis, I'm like, of course, this is the best way to communicate.
I think that is actually the signal I look for to know personally that I'm growing. It's like when I look back, do I just slap myself in the forehead and go, what was I thinking? Why was I doing these things, right? Like, how did I think that was ever going to work? And I think that's really a sign of growth, right? Like, you've grown a lot. And so now looking back, you're like, yeah, I mean, back then I didn't know those things. But you also kind of had to go through these experiences in order to learn, to have these learnings, right? Like, you couldn't have gone in there and been like, yeah, let's use Slack, because you didn't even know it existed, never mind the benefits it brings, right? Without having had the experience of not using it and then using it later. I love that you feel that way, though. To me, that's like the ultimate signal of learning and growing.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Another tech learning that comes to mind that, again, seems obvious to so many, but using project management tools and Kanban boards, and whether that be Trello or ClickUp or whatever the system is that works best for you.
Are you telling me that you were organizing $1 million plus events that are really complicated without having project management tooling?
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's the whole point of the company, no? Is to manage projects?
You would think so, but again, it was miraculous, the things that we were able to pull off without a formal system to make sure that this happened. I mean, truly, Max, we had printed out papers and binders that we would use, and we would it was a combination of Excel documents, and they weren't even Excel documents a lot of times that other people could collaborate in. It was single use Excel. I mean, it is pretty amazing to think of what we were able to accomplish. And it shows you that, I guess, if you really are determined, you can do it the old school way. But why put yourself through that? And why make it so much harder on yourself? If you have these tools available, it's worthwhile taking the time to learn them and educate the team so that we can all be more efficient and effective and kind of move with that velocity as we grow.
I love that learning. And honestly, that makes me think about what we're going to look back on in, 10 years from now. We're probably going to look back at this time frame and be like, what the hell were we thinking back then? We were so inefficient and ineffective. We've learned so many things since then. Actually, that's kind of, to me, a lot of just my personal journey at Stellate is kind of like over the last 1.5 years or however long it's been, it feels like both yesterday and like 100 years. I feel like my journey's just been learning something and then looking back and going, why did I not realize that earlier, right? Like how are we now at the point where I'm learning this only now? It often feels like we're learning things too late. And in reality, I think the Sue always says this, we're probably learning them still very early compared to most other companies, right? Like we recently
Right.
introduced cross-departmental project management, which sounds really obvious. Yes, we have many departments and they need to work together, so you need to manage those projects somehow. But that just never came up, right? Like when we were a 2-person company, and even when we were a 5-person company, right? It was like, yeah, everybody just kind of knew what needed to get done, right? Like there was no strong pain associated with needing cross-departmental project management. But now that we're, I don't know, 13 people now, it's very different, right? And suddenly you need that coordination so that everybody knows what is the goal of the project, what are we trying to accomplish, and what are the parts that need to get done, and at what time do we expect them to get done, right? Like all of that sounds extremely obvious in hindsight, but we didn't have that, and eventually we kind of felt the pain of it, and then we introduced project management now. But it's always been like, I look back 2 weeks ago and we were a totally different company, right? I look back, never mind a month or 3 months or 6 months ago, totally different company, because we're constantly getting better. For the most part, we're constantly getting better and learning new things. And I think that's, to me, really why I enjoy being here, just very personally, and why I enjoy founding startups generally. It's because I have the opportunity to learn all of these things, right? And I have the opportunity to grow as the company grows and to learn how to be better. And I think really as the CEO, I feel like that's kind of a big part of my job, is just figuring out how we can be better very broadly, right? And that applies to the company, but that also applies to me personally, right? Like how can I be better at my job, at whatever part of my job that I'm focused on right at that moment? How can I be better at it? How can I be more efficient and effective to get us where we want to go faster? Which I think is really fun, to be honest.
Yes. An easy way I usually sum this up in my head is progress over perfection. You know, you could sit there and ideate on something and really try to make it perfect. But as long as you're progress over perfection, I think especially in the startup world, that is key. And then you look back in hindsight and you're like, wow, we've come such a long way because of those little incremental progress moments every single day that you're learning and you're growing. I think one of the other things too that we're doing is sharing those learnings back. And that's so important. Is I may have a huge aha moment and learn from something, but if I don't take that knowledge and share it back with the company, then is that really efficient? Is that really helping other people? Not really. It's so important to take the time to say, I just learned something, and sometimes it's learning it the hard way, but I need to go back and share that with the company.
Totally. I love that. I think that's also been finally enough, a recent learning for us as a company, right? It's if we learn something, but then we don't bring it back to everybody else, then the company hasn't learned anything, right? Then I have the knowledge in my head, or you have the knowledge in your head, but nobody else has that knowledge. And so we can't do anything with that learning. We can't apply that learning anywhere. And so it's really important to bring people along, explain what you're learning and why you think it's important, or how it matters, or how you're using it. And then I think the second step of that actually is applying the learnings, right? It's all fine and dandy that you're learning something, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I just learned that this is true. But then you also got to ask yourself, okay, but what does that actually mean? Why does that matter, right? Like we just learned this. Does that matter, right? Like how are we applying this learning now to our situation? Does this change anything? And often I feel like that second step is actually almost the harder part. It's like you got to share the learning, but then you also got to apply the learning. You got to actually sit down and think, okay, I just learned that we have a pain here. Cool. How are you applying that learning, right? Like what does that mean for your day-to-day business? I found that to be really important. Just ask myself and ask others, how are you applying that learning, right? Like what does this change, if anything? And some things don't change anything, but often things you realize, oh, that actually does change something. So you were at this tech company. Was there anything else you learned there that sticks out to you that you apply today? And then why did you eventually decide to leave that company again and pursue a new opportunity?
So again, I feel lucky in the fact that a lot of my recent career changes, I've been approached, and somebody I've had a relationship with has approached me and said, hey, Lauren, we see potential in you and we would love you to join our team. And so I do have that loyalty within me, as shown that I was with that original startup for so long, for over 8 years. But at the same time, I want to be open to new opportunities, and I want to be open to stretching myself in growth. And so at this tech startup, things with their product were kind of stalling a little bit, and the team had shrunk and the hiring efforts were kind of on pause. And so it kind of seemed like a natural progression for me to say, yeah, let's go try a new industry and let's go try recruiting in a completely different space. And so I'm an animal lover, and we will save the crazy animal conversation for a different time. I have so many animal stories, but I was approached by a colleague, a previous colleague in the veterinary space, and it's a completely different industry for me, but they needed help on their recruiting team in a special operations sense. It was a hybrid role that was going to do not only recruiting veterinarians, but also helping train new companies that they were acquiring and bringing on under their merger and acquisition umbrella, essentially. And so, again, I felt like since it was wearing a few different hats, it kind of felt that it fit my skill set and being a kind of a Swiss Army knife, so to say, and having the different skill sets to be able to flex. And so took the opportunity to explore what the veterinary space looked like, learned so much from a medical standpoint and also just from a different growing industry standpoint. It's a completely different talent pool, and the skills and what you're looking for are completely different. Even the way that you source and approach candidates are different. But again, I think all of these learnings are going to make me a better recruiter and a better employee in the long term. So I've taken every learning from all my previous experiences with me. I was not planning on making a change, but I would say 2022 in my life has just been the year of changes. We moved cities to a new city to be closer to friends and some family. I welcomed my daughter, became a mom for the first time, huge life change. If that wasn't enough, I decided, sure, let me jump right back into the startup life and join Stellate, a growing tech company. And so I guess the theme for me of 2022 has been embracing change. And when the opportunity presented itself, I felt like I would be silly to not jump at the opportunity, because I felt like this team was so smart and they were so passionate and they were driving towards a common goal. And I wanted to be a part of that momentum, and I wanted to learn from the team. And 2 months in, I can definitely say every day has been a learning experience, which I've appreciated.
I actually, you just said that 2022 has been about embracing change, but I feel like listening to your journey so far, I feel like that's just been the story of your life. I feel like you've embraced change at every single instance, at every single crossroads. Every time you had to make a change, you were like, that sounds like something I've never done before. That sounds totally different. Sure, let me just try to figure out how this works, right? I feel like that's just very much the story of your life, as I've heard, is very much about embracing change. So I don't know that that's really a 2022 kind of thing. I feel like that's just a Lauren Bell kind of thing.
Yes, you're right there. I would say 2022 is maybe one of those like extra change years, but you're right. And I think part of that is surrounding yourself with people that really put trust in you, surrounding yourself with people that are going to be okay when you do fall or when you do make mistakes, because part of stretching yourself and taking on new responsibility is you're inevitably going to make mistakes along the way. But as long as you have a team that is supportive around you, and they're going to lift you back up and they're going to be there to help support you, I think that's what has enabled me to be open to that for so long. And making sure that I have people around me that I trust and I respect and that I know want the best for me, and they want the best in my career, and they're looking out for me in that way. And so moving forward, I'm going to continue to want to surround myself with people that I feel like are going to bring the best out of me in that way.
That's beautiful. Is there anything that sticks out to you over the course of 2022 between becoming a new mom, moving cities, and moving jobs to Stellate? Are there any learnings that stick out to you that have left a particularly big impression on you?
Gosh, I think becoming a mom and having all of a sudden what you thought you had a limited free time, and then you become a parent and you realize now you really have no free time, because every second of your day needs to be dedicated to either caring for another human being or doing your job. I mean, it's hard to find time in the day for myself these days, but at the same time, I think it's taught me to be extremely intentional with my time and to value my time. And the days of just doom scrolling on TikTok are kind of coming to an end. And now I think it's taught me to, when I do set aside time to work on specific things, or I have a meeting that I need to prep for, I am that much more intentional, because I know I need to be the most efficient and effective I can be in that limited amount of time, so that then the time outside of work I can dedicate to being the very best mom and the very best partner I can be in my family. So if anything, I appreciate that. And I guess Sue says this, and I agree with it now being a mom, but having a baby is probably the closest thing you could do to also working for a startup, because you are building processes and you are learning rapidly and you are experimenting and you are pivoting on a daily basis to try to meet the needs of this new little human that needs you at at every instance. And so I think there's a lot of correlation basically between parenting and startup life. And I've appreciated, again, those parallels. And I try to take the learnings, honestly, that I in my home environment to work, and vice versa. There are things I learn on the job that I can apply to my daily life as well, that have helped me be a better parent.
I think that's a lesson that from not being a parent, I think that's a lesson that a lot of people who are new parents have to learn. Actually, Lee Byron, one of our advisors and the creator of GraphQL, he actually just recently published a blog post about he tracks all of his time, and he wrote this blog post because he has two young sons, where he did these, maybe we can link it in the description of this podcast episode, where he has like two pie charts. And before kids, it's like, a third of his time was spent on work, a third of his time was spent on sleep, and then the last third is sort of pretty much half split between self-time and social time. That's just how he categorizes it, right? And then after kids, it's like a little bit less than a third of his time is spent on work, much less than a third of the time is spent on sleep, more than a third is now spent on children, and then self and social are basically just like these small slivers of pie chart that are barely left, right? And you can see how the children really have taken over both sleep time, but then largely self and social time, where it's just, you only have so much time, right? And so when you have to care for another human, that time has to come from somewhere, right? And you can only reduce sleep so much before everything starts breaking down, and you can only reduce work so much before everything starts breaking down. And so really just starts eating into social and self-time.
Of course. Oh my gosh, yes. And again, I think that's where it helps to find a work environment where you enjoy the people that you're working with, because that can in some ways supplement a little bit of that missing social time that all of a sudden is lacking in your life. But being a new parent, it absolutely, intentionality is what comes to mind. It's been the biggest learning, and maximizing the little time that you have in a day. Of course, we all say we wish we had more hours in the day, but it's never been more true now that I'm a parent. And so I think that's been a huge learning, and I'm still figuring that out. I'm only 4.5 months in, and I'm excited to see how that continues to evolve. But there's so many of us in the industry that are parents or thinking about that in the future. And so I think it's also going to enable me to have better empathy for people moving forward, because now I can actually understand. I think I always thought I knew what it was like, and then you actually experience it, and it is so much more than you ever thought. And so the amount of empathy I have for other individuals who may be in similar circumstances and be working parents has grown 3 times what it was before.
That's a beautiful learning to have, and I hope as you continue to bring intentionality to more of your life, you'll get some of your self and social time back to where it's not just all spent. Particularly, I think as children grow up, I would reckon that percentage of time goes down a little bit, but in the early stages, it really does require a lot of your time, unfortunately.
Yes,
well,
yes.
Thank you, Lauren, so much for joining this podcast episode, and thank you for sharing your story and a lot of your learnings with us today. Is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with? Anything that you want to call out? Anything where they should follow you, or that they should do, or anything that you want to plug?
No, not that comes to mind. I mean, we are hiring for some really exciting roles. Like you said, Max, some of these roles are pretty specific in what we're looking for. And so if you feel like you even have part of what we are looking for, I would love to talk with you. Sometimes I think candidates, especially it's true of women, that they sometimes self-eliminate themselves before they will even apply to a role. They look at the job posting or they look at the job description, and if they don't meet every single criteria, they're like, well, I'm not going to apply for that. I'm not the right person for that role. And if I had that mindset throughout my career, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so I guess I would encourage candidates out there to be your own advocate and be confident in yourself and put yourself out there, even if you don't feel like you meet every single qualification, because I think you'll surprise yourself a lot of times. And it's open. I'm open to having conversations with candidates who don't necessarily fit the exact pedigree that we're looking for, but as long as they would have the main skill set and they would have, like you said, kind of that chart. I don't know how you put it earlier, Max, but that made a lot of sense to me. The career trajectory to get where we need them to be, the slope, I think that's what's most important. And so those would be the biggest things. And I'm looking forward to speaking to really talented people that want to join Stellate as we continue to grow.
I would say I didn't pay her to say this, but we're totally paying her as our recruiter. So I don't know that really applies in this scenario, but thank you for shouting that out, Lauren. If you want to learn more about the roles that we're hiring for, go to stellate.co/careers. You can see all of the open roles and learn a little bit more about what we're doing and our culture and really anything else you want. We try, like you mentioned, we try to be as open as we possibly can. So you'll see this podcast and our handbook and our values and a whole bunch of other stuff. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining, Lauren. It really was a pleasure to speak with you. And I will see you all in the next episode of the Future Founder Promise podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for your time as well, Max. Have a great day.